So I want to tell you a joke. Well, I think it's kind of funny. We'll see if you're laughing in a minute or not, so you'll agree. It's about a young monk who goes to a monastery. Always good when you start with monks. And he walks in and he realizes that he's been assigned a task of copying out sacred text. Kind of not so exciting. And he points out a problem right away to the abbot, and he says, "Abbot, what if there's a mistake in one of these texts? We're just going to keep copying. Where's the original manuscript that we should be looking from?" And the abbot says, "My son, I know your family. Let me reassure you, it's going to be okay. We're very precise with all of our copying. But just to make sure you're fine, I will go down into our vault, I will double check, and I will make sure the copying is exact." And so the abbot goes away and he goes down into the vault. And an hour passes, and then 2, and then 3. And at this point, the monk is really starting to wonder what's going on. So he decides to head down to the vault to find out what's happening. And when he gets there, he sees that the abbot is hitting his head against the wall, crying. And he hears him say, "We missed the R. We missed the R. It says celebrate." Okay, thanks. I thought you would find it funny. I'll tell you something else, though I think that story kind of sums up the negativity bias that we all have, is a joke about a couple who were getting ready for Hanukkah. Now, the husband asks the wife, "What would you like for Hanukkah?" And she says, "Nothing would make me happier than a diamond necklace." So he buys her nothing, because nothing would make her happier. Well, I'm sure she wasn't so happy that Hanukkah. But in all seriousness, there are certain things that can kind of prevent us from seeing the possibilities and therefore being able to find happiness in our lives. I am sure you, like me, want to enter into 5784 excited, energetic, and positive. But let's kind of take a moment and think about what are some of the things that can prevent us from doing so. Tara Brock, who's a meditation teacher and clinical psychologist, teaches that frequently the blocks to happiness are one of 2 things. If you kind of really peel back all the layers of the onion and ask yourself, why? She says that it's either something missing, the if only mindset, or something's wrong. Well, let's kind of unpack this a little bit more for a deeper understanding. The if only mindset, if only things were a little bit easier in my life, I would be happier. If only I had a better partner, a better job, if only I could get more done in a day, and it would be just perfect. But unfortunately, that hole is not necessarily going to be filled. By the way, the if only thing can be as small as if only I'd had time to go and get some coffee that day. But sometimes even that's not going to make you feel better. Just to put it in perspective, I want you to think about a bear going into hibernation. It's October, so right at the beginning. And he looks up and he says, "If only I hadn't had that double espresso macchiato when I was snacking on those campers right before I came in here." Still, he was wide awake. The even more challenging and painful moments occur much later, when we think retrospectively that if we had not had the if only mindset. And I'll share a story with you, and it's based on a story that Rabbi Lawrence Kushner has in his book, the Book of Miracles. And he describes these 2 teenagers, Shimon and Reuben, walking through the Red Sea. This sea has split, just to let you know exactly what's going on. But Reuben and Shimon are not paying at all attention. Why? They're focused on their feet, the mud on their feet specifically. And you can kind of hear them fetching and complaining. And when they get to the other side, they don't even realize that they had gone through a sea They had walked through a miracle. Everybody was dancing jubilantly, and they were utterly confused. The Midrash says their eyes were closed. They may as well have been asleep. There are times when all we can do is focus on what is absent. That if only things were better, if only that thing hadn't been absent. We fail to look up to see everything that is in actuality present. That negativity bias, that refers to that psychological phenomenon where all we do is focus on the absence, the cup is half empty, and those negative events. And the truth is, psychological research teaches that that mindset can have a tremendous impact on one's psychological state and, more important, the decisions that one makes, positively or negatively, based on that mindset. And I just want to reassure you, of course it's normal to have that nagging feeling in our minds. Of course we have those doubts. But let's look at the second thing that Tara Brach taught. That it's something is wrong. Now, I want you to realize this one. This is nature's way of reminding us to be worried. We were, after all, in worrying pose for those yogis. Ha, 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 not warrior pose. Okay, never mind. Worrying pose on the Sahara Desert, worrying that we were about to get attacked by a lion. So some of this instincts that we have, they were in fact very beneficial and powerful for us. They protected us and made sure we were okay. But think about when you're in your worrying state, you narrow your gaze. You don't do it just physically, you do it emotionally, mentally. And you stop looking up. You stop seeing. You only see even what you perceive and think is negative. So when we read the story this morning of God telling Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, of course, that is a negative story. Or it can be. There is, after all, an inherent contradiction in the text. Just one chapter earlier, God tells Abraham that Isaac's going to be the future progenitor of all of his children. Don't worry. And yet, one chapter later, God says, sacrifice your son, your only one, the one you love, to me, Isaac. Doesn't make any sense. Don't worry, the rabbis saw and felt the contradiction as well. Was it God's contradicting himself or herself, presenting a theological challenge? Or was it Abraham's lack of confrontation with God, questioning like he had in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah just a few chapters before? The Midrash focuses on the word Olah, Ayin Lamed He. And it teaches that if you play with the vowels that are in the word, it really means Olah, to go up. So God wasn't necessarily telling Abraham to go and sacrifice his son, but God was telling Abraham to bring Isaac up to the mountain so Isaac can be part of the covenant. Obviously, that's not what the text says literally. We have to read that in a little bit metaphorically, but the rabbis really wanted to recognize and smooth out the contradiction so that it wasn't so much a contradiction, but it was an opportunity. And we can almost imagine Abraham thinking afterwards, in my haste, I almost sacrificed my protected child. I caused our family significant pain and stress. I scared my son. I scared myself. And in truth, how many of us can say reflectively, we have done that, whether to ourselves, to those around us, because we truly believed something being presented to us was, well, horrible. The Radak goes on later in the medieval period to highlight the same contradiction as a test of faith for future generations. Getting on the same train that the rabbis had, that it was about going up the mountain to commune with God. Again, I want to remind us that the negativity bias has helped us survive over the years by avoiding threats. And Abraham would have doubted the covenant with God If Abraham had doubted the covenant God, we wondered what would have happened next. This negativity bias, of course, can prevent us from being happy. But let's think about a different thing that can happen as well. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Yitzhak Perlman, the violinist. In 1995, November 18th specifically, he gave a concert at Avery Fisher Hall in New York City. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with who Yitzhak Perlman is or any of his challenges that he faced as a human being. He suffered from polio and as a result walked with a significant limp and wears braces on his legs. It can be very painful for him to walk, and sometimes he just doesn't want to do it. But regardless, he became a world-renowned musician. One day he was in the concert hall, and as he was playing a few measures into the music, everybody can hear a popping sound. And for any violinist, that will tell you, heartbreak. The string just broke. Now, most people would sit there and fetch about it. They might start over it. And for Isaac Perlman, of course, he could have focused on the pain of getting up, walking across the stage and restringing the violin or getting a backup violin. He did neither. He chose to do something quite impressive. He played around the broken string. He improvised. And that night he was said to have played with more passion, power, and purity that piece than ever before. When asked afterwards, he smiled, wiping the sweat from his brow, and he said, "You know, sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left." I think that is truly what the negativity bias needs sometimes. It needs us to figure out what we can do with what we actually have, to see what's really going on in front of us, maybe how we best combat it. Well, I want to suggest to you 2 tools to put in your toolbox for a new year, a new you, to help get around that negativity bias that we all have. First, slow down. And I say this because I'm the person who tries to fit 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag and tell you I'm going to do 20 things when I really probably have time for 10. So this is as much a sentence and statement to me as it is to you. But I encourage you to slow down. When I think about what it is that children do, they go around and they play outside. Well, they may play fast and slow, but the gift of being outside kind of gives them the opportunity to slow down and see what the butterfly is doing, what's going on in nature, what's actually happening around them, and find absolute delight in that. Can you slow down? Can you make a promise to yourself to look around and see the joy? And even if it's not a joyful moment, maybe simply by slowing down, you're going to be able to find something inside of it which is magnificent, or at least an opportunity to see all of the options displayed before you. The second thing, and this is a hard one for some of us, is to do acts of kindness, not just because you know that it's the right thing to do, but also because by doing so, and this is the most magnificent thing about it, you start to rewire your brain. Scientific research tells us that being kind helps us not just mentally, but not just physically, but also mentally. By performing acts of generosity, we can lower our blood pressure, have a more positive outlook, and not feel quite as stressed. We can increase those bonds with our friends and our neighbors. We can begin the process of being able to see, again, all of the potential things in front of us to avoid falling into the trap that is that negativity bias. May this new year give us the opportunity to slow down, be a little kinder, and a little bit more gentle to ourselves and to those around us. And may we be blessed with a Shana Tova U'Mituka, a sweet, healthy, and happy new year.